Thank you for joining us in the Demystifying the Science of Reading webinar series. This is part one of a 6-part series. And today we will review the research behind the science of reading, the popular research, and see what others are saying about why we should follow this research. Here you will find a QR code where you can snag the slides for this presentation. And finally, my name is Erin McNeil. I am a learning specialist for literacy at Keep Indiana Learning, and I spent 18 years in a classroom as an English teacher, an ELL teacher and coordinator, and then as a professor of literacy at Indiana University. I'm excited to share with you the research about the science of reading and then my interpretations of that research. In today's session, we are going to first look over the neuroscience and the neuroimaging research. We'll talk about the stages of reading acquisition, a simple view of reading, and then whole word versus phonics instruction. So first, did you know that our brains were not predispositioned for reading and writing? When we learn to read, we are actually changing our brains by making new connections. Over the last several years, the advances in psychology and neuroscience have begun to unravel the principles underlying the brain's reading circuits. Modern brain imaging methods now reveal that the brain areas that activate when we decipher written words. So here is a short video on the research about how the brain learns to read.
Today, I want to talk specifically about the topic of reading and what we understand about it from the brain's point of view. I want to show you a sort of caricature that you can remember. And it's very simply that reading starts as any other visual stimulation in these generic visual areas of the occipital pole of the brain, but then very quickly moves into an area that we have discovered, which concentrates the recognition of the written word. I have called it the brain's letterbox, because it is where we store our knowledge of letters. And from there, what you have seen is this explosion of activity into at least two networks, one that concerns the meaning of the words, and another that concerns the pronunciation and the articulation of the word. And so we can say essentially from the brain's point of view that learning to read consists first in recognizing the letters and how they combine into written words, and second, connecting them to these systems coding for speech sounds and for meaning.
So Dr. Dehaene is a cognitive psychologist at the College of France, and he directs the cognitive neuroimaging unit. He is a specialist in reading and is known for uncovering the visual word form area in the left hemisphere, which he called the letterbox. And he is instrumental in recognizing letters as we learn to read. I do recommend watching this entire video. There's a 33-minute video called How the Brain Learns to Read by Professor Dehaene. And there's also a book called Reading in the Brain that is very interesting. So if you are interested, please check out that text. But we will talk about his work. So here is a short version of his work. So first, as he said in the video, we learn to speak first, and then we start by processing written word. It starts in our eyes. And then we realize that the word is made up of morphemes, which are the smallest part of words, such as roots or the base words. And we decompose those morphemes on a path that leads us from vision to meaning. So the letterbox transforms the information. We look at the information and then it goes to our letterbox. And then in our letterbox, we either go to infrequently used words where we convert those to sounds, or frequently used words that we have figured out through orthographic mapping by understanding that they go from our letterbox to sounding them out. And we've done that several times, and then they become a word that we know that's a frequently used word. It goes to a different part of our brain that is concerned with identity and meaning. So this really shows the need to understand how to decode words, because once we have done that several times, we begin to understand the whole word. So learning to read involves connecting two sets of brain regions that are already present, the object recognition system and the language circuit. And there are several phases of learning to read words by sight. So first is the pre-alphabetic phase, and this is the phase where letter sound relations are not involved in connections. So we don't understand yet that letters and sounds are connected. In phase two, the partial alphabetic phase, some of the letters in written sounds and words are detected. So we start to understand that letters and sounds and how they belong to one another. In the full alphabetic phase, we have made those connections between each letter having a phoneme, so each letter having a sound meaning. And then in the consolidated phase, we have done repeated experience reading phoneme blends, and it allows readers to begin to read multi-letter units, and we begin to recognize patterns, and we start to become more fluent. And then we are starting to read by sight. So Scarborough's reading rope is an extension of the simple view of reading that divides and intertwines the two main parts of reading, which is language comprehension and word recognition. So word recognition and language comprehension work together to foster skilled reading or reading comprehension. Word recognition skills allow students to identify words first through the decoding process and later automatically, as was shown in the 4 stages of reading to become sight words. And then language comprehension represents students' ability to understand spoken language, and that is largely dependent on the student's breadth and depth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So when brought together, strong word recognition and language comprehension leads to proficient and fluid reading comprehension. Additionally, there is a famous study that looks at whole word versus phonics instruction. Bruce McCandless has a great webinar about this study on the Amplify Reading podcast series that is linked in the resources of this webinar. So there were 16 literate adults who were taught a made-up script of lines and curves. Some of the adults were taught to memorize as a whole word, and some were taught to decode this made-up script. After 24 hours, the adults were tested later, and it was found that they were more efficient at remembering how to decode words than they were at remembering whole words. So this research was instrumental in looking at why decoding is important. Additionally, the researchers explained that if you knew how to decode words, you could learn more words than as whole word instruction, where you were just learning each word separately. So the study by Stanford University on sight words and the brain notes that as long as participants use the letter sound patterns, they were able to continue to read words they had never seen before. And more importantly, that there is no need to memorize what can be read. So the findings underscored the role of grapheme-phoneme mappings, and they recognized that self-teaching for decodable words was what was happening in our brain as we decoded words through grapheme and phoneme mappings. So this is a video that shows how this works.
Learning to read creates neural pathways between the different brain areas important for learning to read. In the beginning of learning to read, we need to focus on mapping the sounds of language onto the letters. That is primarily done by the triangle between the fusiform gyrus, the superior temporal gyrus, and the perisylvian regions. Key areas for learning to read somehow need to communicate with each other. This is done by long axons, also called white matter tracts. You then connect these different areas to the CEO of the reading network, or the inferior frontal gyrus. Basic research has told us a lot about how the brain is learning to read.
So how can you use this research in your classroom? We would love to have real life examples of teachers integrating this research into their classroom, whether that means teaching phonemes and graphemes instead of whole word instruction, or whether we're teaching our students how their brain is working as they learn to read. If you still have questions, please reach out. My contact information is available on the screen, and I would love to talk with you. If you could please share your feedback and your ideas in this short survey, we would appreciate it. Again, thank you for viewing our webinar at Keep Indiana Learning.